It is true that my grandma on my mother's side was a first generation Mexican American. Her parents were from southern Mexico, and I'm mispronouncing it because I don't speak Spanish, but Michoacan, there I mispronounced it, that's where they were from. They moved to Buffalo, New York, and she was born after they already moved to America, so she was a first generation Mexican American. And when I first realized what a difference that made, whether you're a first generation American versus someone who actually came from Mexico and then started their life and here in the United States. I remember as a teenager, she was telling a story. Now, it just so happened that the neighborhood that she lived in our town in Alabama, where I grew up, it just so happened that she was living in a community where it was Mexican American people, but most of them were actually born in Mexico and moved here, and therefore Spanish was their first language, and a lot of them didn't speak that great of English. She was the opposite. She wasn't allowed to speak Spanish growing up. Her parents wanted her to learn perfect English, and the plan worked. But ultimately, she barely spoke Spanish. And culturally, there was a difference because she told a story just days after it happened, where she was saying, oh, I looked at the neighbors next to me, and those Mexicans, they brought out a goat, and then they slit its throat, and then they cut it up, and they cooked it, and they ate it. It was just disgusting, those Mexicans. And it's so funny because obviously I was laughing, hearing this story as a teenager just days after it happened. And finally, I was able to say, don't you remember that you're Mexican? But ultimately, it just shows the cultural difference between someone who's a first generation Mexican American versus others who are not, because not only did she not speak Spanish, but there was that cultural difference. Now, granted, had her own parents not moved out of Mexico and moved to Buffalo, New York, there's a good chance she would have been accustomed to killing a goat and eating it right there and making a fun event. But she had become so Americanized, or whatever you want to call it, that to her that was a foreign concept. And so much to the point that she even said those Mexicans, which it's still funny to me because I get it how cultured my grandma was into the United States, but still that she would call other people Mexicans and not recognize that label for herself. It's very interesting to me, but I think in hindsight too, it's not like my grandma was always talking about Mexican things. She talked about life in New York. And I think even for me now as a 37-year-old person, I realize so much of what was Mexican about her was more about family dynamics and culture that way. But really, she was American. She was a first generation. It just happened to be that her DNA was the same mix as what many people from Mexico are. But ultimately, she was more American than anything. It just happened to be her name, Lola Mendez, and where her parents came from, that was the most Mexican thing about her. But being born as a first generation American, it totally made a difference. And now I'm starting to really grasp that. So I'm making this video, I guess, for anyone out there who wants to join the conversation as far as whether you're a first generation Mexican American and you can see the cultural difference between you and your own family, or if you, like me, had a grandparent or a parent who was, and you can see how culturally you're American but still members of your own family are not. That was clearly the experience that my own Mexican American grandma had. But really, more than anything, the thing maybe most distinctively cultural about her was the fact that she was from Buffalo, New York. Her accent, I suppose, was a Buffalo, New York accent. And her life experiences were based around Buffalo, New York, not based around Mexico. So I think it's interesting for me to put that in perspective. So I thought about that story. I thought how relevant to share with everybody on this channel. If you have any experience like that, or maybe it's not that you're, it's not a story about a first generation Mexican American, maybe it's a first generation Korean American, or whatever it is. I think this conversation topic has more places to go, and I'd love to hear what you have to say. So you know what to do. comment section right here.